pie crust. It's very simple, and the idea is that you want to encapsulate the fat. In this case, it would be a compound of butter and shortening. You want to encapsulate it in flour, so that way when it bakes, the shortening that is encapsulated will be absorbed into the flour, and that's what makes like an air bubble, and that's what gives you flakiness. So we start with flour. In this particular case, I use cake flour, which is kind of unusual. And then there's salt, baking powder, and sugar. If you don't add sugar, it's just flour and salt and water, which is very tasty. That's double. And then put your shortening in. Then you coat the shortening, and eventually you want it to look like it's cornmeal. So you cut your shortening into small little blocks, and if you can push it with your finger, then it's the right temperature. I use a pastry cutter to begin with, and that cuts it up pretty easy. A food processor, many people use a food processor, and for this step, I think the food processor is fine. What I have a problem with is the next step when you add the water. Every time I use a food processor, it over-processes it. And a lot of people have really good success. I just don't. So even when I use a food processor for this step, then I still take it out of the food processor and then add the water. So this cuts up the shortening, and one of the reasons I use shortening, a lot of people think that butter crust is the best, but most of them are not bakers. Butter has a really low melting point, and you want your pie crust to be cold when it goes into the oven, and it keeps those, it creates the air bubbles. So I use a vegetable shortening that has butter solids in it, so it actually gives it a butter taste, but has all the properties of shortening. The best, of course, is lard, but today's world we don't use lard. So you can see it's been crumbled up, and then I take 2 handfuls and rub them together like this, and then that grinds it down, but you can't put too much pressure on it, and your hands can't be too warm because then it'll melt the shortening. It gets to this stage, you can see these round ones is just compressed shortening. They aren't, or shortening flour. Then you add water. Then, when you add the water, this is going to coat my hands, and it's going to be just like working in mud. Sometimes people will want to do that. You see the texture, it needs just a little bit more flour. You don't want to put too much in because it'll alter the recipe. Now, you can see it's on my hands. How I know it's mixed is when this pulls all the dough with my hands. ready. You don't want to overwork it because it's not bread. And you can see it's taking most of the dough off the hands. Then next, here at Tartine we scale it. Our biggest concern is that everything is flavor and quality control, so we want to make sure that each one of our pies have the same amount of fruit, the same amount of dough in it. Same recipe, we weigh everything by grams, so what we want is 60 grams. If we put too many grams, the crust is too thick, and too little, it's too thin. So, make those. And we sell between 1,500 and 2,000 of our small pies per week. And so you can imagine after making that many pie shells a week, we have the scaling down pretty good. 1 gram off. We have 4 full-time pie shell makers that they work on our pie shells every day, and then we have 3 full-time chefs, and then myself. So and 1 part-time. So we have 8 chefs. And we have 23 chairs. And then we have about 2/3 of our business is takeout. So that accounts for the big volume. On weekends we have a waiting list. And it's got to where during the week it's about the same. Alright, so what we do is we have what we call 1 tray. And pie shells. Next is rolling. So with these, the perfect weight. Now when we roll them, they come out to the perfect size. And put them in here, and whoop. The test for all of our pie shell makers is that this particular part of the process, they have to be able to do with their eyes closed. And this part is actually done by feel and not by look. So rolling we have to look at. Take this, and at this point is when they do not look, and they look up, and then all this has to be done by feel. Then one more time around. So, our philosophy here at Tartine is that we want to have the most simple recipes possible. And a lot of recipes have a lot more steps, but then it gets a different taste. And what we're after is home taste. And this is the way that farmers' wives made their pies in the olden days. So that's the way my grandmother used to make it. So our pie is really simple. Our fruit pies is nothing more than fruit, sugar, we use brown sugar, and flour and water. That's it. We don't add any flavorings, flour is the only thickener. So rhubarb is a native plant of Mongolia, and then about 1700s it spread throughout the world. So this is what they call flash frozen. So it's been grown and then they cut it and flash freeze it so the taste is there. And we add sugar, brown sugar. I like brown sugar to all of our fruit pies because it adds a little dimension to the taste. Where white sugar doesn't really add, it adds sweetness but not just taste. Rhubarb is really sour, so we add sugar. But we want it to be sweet and sour. Now we add the flour. And that coats the rhubarb and also keeps the flour from lumping. So we add our water. And our recipes are all designed on 8 pie shells. So this recipe will make 8 pies. So if we want 16, all we have to do is double it. Our rhubarb comes in 600-gram containers, so that will make 8 pies. Our blueberries, we have 1 kilo, and then that will make 16 pies. So then you can see the sugar has been washed off of the flour. The sugar and flour have been washed off of the rhubarb, and then this is the thickening, the sweet. So we use a slotted spoon. And because the rhubarb is different size, on this particular one we can't go by gram for each pie. So we pretty much divide it up by eye. We're the only business in Korea that offers rhubarb anything. And the supplier imports it, and we don't know who else buys it. But we haven't seen it anywhere. This is what we call the sauce. So this has the water, the flour, and the sugar in it. There's also water inside the rhubarb, so it comes out. And it goes into a hot oven. Bakes for about 30 to 40 minutes, but it's when it bubbles is what really makes a difference. Most recipes all say about, the time is about. So all chefs need to look and see it with their eyes on whether it's finished or not. There. This gives us our rhubarb pie. Now, all of our pies are single crust, and the reason we do single crust is that a standard pie is this size, and then you cut a piece. So it means that this part of the crust is only here in the bottom crust. But for our pies, they're individual ones, so you're getting all of this pie around here. So it's the pie to fruit ratio that we're concerned with. So we don't put a top crust. Also, in the olden days, the top crust, only the rich people could have it, and that's where the word upper crust came from. It's only the upper crust could afford one. So we use this. But the baking process dries out the fruit, so it's not real pretty. And it also needs something to hold the moisture in. So we use a Belgian glaze, and this is from Belgium. And we put this on the top. And this will, as you can see just here, it gives it a nice transparent finish on top. Adds a little moisture. It's a neutral taste, so it doesn't add any flavor to the pie. It does add a little texture, and the byproduct of it is that when we put this on, the color is really nice. So in our showcase, with all the different kinds of pies, each one is a different color, and they look like little jewels. Also, people can see which pie they're getting. If we didn't do the open, then in some way we would have to mark each pie on what's inside. And I don't think it would be as attractive. Also, pie is new to Koreans, and they like being able to see the color and the fruit. And I think if I was to return to America and open a pie shop, I would still do this glaze on the small pies instead of a top layer, which we're accustomed to. I think it's a technique that was out of necessity, but has worked out really well. So now we have these really pretty pies. Each one looks like a little gem. And you can see the crust on the bottom is nice and brown. And fluting here, this is a solid rim here. This is thinner. So this keeps it, so when we take it out of the pan to serve it on a plate,